Hey friends, this is Derrick Broze, the Conscious Resistance Network, and today we're going to talk about, well, we're going to answer another question. So before we do that, let me remind you guys to bookmark theconsciousresistance.com, which is the home for all of my work, all of my content, essays, articles, vlogs. I'm back to writing articles, and I'm posting them here at from the Mind Unleashed onto our website. You can follow us on Minds, you can follow us on Steemit/DTube, you can join our Discord channel if you want to get plugged into the community, sign up for text lists, updates right to your phone on remind.com. If you want to watch our videos outside of YouTube, go to BitChute. And if you'd like to support monthly, do so at Patreon or Subscribestar. And for those who want to follow our email newsletter, you can do so right there. All right, guys, so this is number 2 in Questions for Derrick, which is a brand new series I'm starting in 2020. We've already done questions for Derrick number 1 about what is counter-economics. And this one, I didn't actually receive a very specific question from an audience member. I do have other videos planned because some of you did email me questions, and I'm thankful for that. And if anybody else wants to email me questions, you can hit me up at Derrick, DERRICK, at theconsciousresistance.com. But I did want to do this video because I realized that in one form or another, some of the audience, some of you guys have asked me this or made the assumption. And the question is, are you a patriot? So today we're going to look at the definition of that term, patriot. I'm going to give you some of my thoughts on how I think it has been convoluted and twisted and turned around. And we'll also see what is the relation between anarchism, which I believe is true sovereignty and true freedom, which is what I believe in, and ideas like patriotism, and also maybe a little bit of how this all ties into, if it does at all, into the concept of nationalism. So let's just dive headfirst into this. Let's go ahead and start with the Merriam-Webster definition. Patriotism, love for or devotion to one's country. And there's a quote from Christopher Hempel says, although poles apart ideologically, they are both unashamed of their patriotism, kind of giving an example of it. Synonyms for patriotism, you can look here and you see nationalism is sort of put as a synonym, which we'll talk about that in just a moment. And here's another example of patriotism in a sentence. You may not agree with him politically, but no one can question his patriotism. They supported the war with a fierce patriotism. So there you go with an example of tying war and violence to patriotism. And so again, let's look at this definition. Love for or devotion to one's country. So let's hold on to that definition for just a moment. And let's check out over here at wordnik.com. Patriotism, and it gives you a few different examples from the American Heritage Dictionary. Love of and devotion to one's country. The Century Dictionary. Love of one's country, the passion which moves a person to serve his country, either in defending it from invasion or in protecting its rights and maintaining its laws and institutions. And there we go. Sort of that one is tying it, the love of one's country, patriotism, into maintaining laws and institutions. And we'll talk about that. Love of country embodied or personified, patriots collectively. From the GNU version of the Collaborative International Dictionary of English, love of country, devotion to the welfare of one's country, the virtues and actions of a patriot, the passion which inspires one to serve one's country. From Wiktionary, Creative Commons Attribution, love of country, devotion to the welfare of one's compatriots, virtues, it's pretty much the same thing. The desire to compete with other nations, nationalism. So there it is, again, tying patriotism and nationalism together. WordNet 3.0 says love of country and willingness to sacrifice for it. So that kind of gives you a sort of a rundown of what Merriam-Webster, as well as several other sources, say about patriotism. And now we're going to hop over to Wikipedia, and let's just check this little source out. Obviously Wikipedia is not the perfect source. That's why we're looking at multiple sources before somebody says, oh my God, you used Wikipedia. Patriotism, and here they directly tie patriotism to national pride, is the feeling of love, devotion, and sense of attachment to a homeland and alliance with other citizens who share the same sentiment. And you'll also notice here that Wikipedia says not to be confused with nationalism, which they give a totally different category. This attachment can be a combination of many different feelings related to one's homeland, including ethnic, cultural, political, or historical aspects. So one can be a patriot to a specific, a specific land, the ethnicity of the people of that land, the culture of that land, the political landscape of that land, or the history of that land. and it encompasses a set of concepts closely related to, but not the same as, nationalism. Some manifestations of patriotism emphasize the land element and love for one's native land and use the symbolism of agriculture and the soil, or blood and soil, as we have heard before, which people tie to the Nazis, and we heard the alt-right and people say this sort of thing. And so that's kind of a controversial area. And then we go into this. An excess of patriotism in the defense of a nation is called chauvinism, or jingoism is a more recent term, which is the nationalism in the form of aggressive foreign policy, such as countries' advocacy for the use of threats or actual force, as opposed to peaceful relations, jingoism. And this is what I would say the United States definitely is. So excess of patriotism in the defense of a nation is seen as chauvinism or jingoism. The English term patriot is first attested to in the Elizabethan era, came via Middle French from late Latin patriota, meaning countryman, ultimately from Greek, meaning from the same country, meaning fatherland. The abstract noun patriotism appears in the early 18th century. So I think we got a little bit of an example, right? And you can see here in this sign right here, be patriotic, sign your country's pledge to save the food. So unfortunately, we do have examples of throughout history of patriotism being tied to support of war. As this definition says, it tries to say that patriotism is somebody who wants to maintain the laws and institutions. Now, obviously this is just a dictionary. It doesn't tell you if those laws and institutions are good, if they're positive, if they actually represent the people. Love of devotion to one's country, again. And then down here we go to, they supported the war with a fierce patriotism. So supporting the war, now if it's tied to patriotism, and patriotism has to do with one's land, well then you would expect that that war, whatever it may be, is tied to defending that land. So, okay, we just went through all that, right? And of course the question is, am I a patriot? For one, I'll say this. Patriot is not a term I would ever use to describe myself. There's maybe been one time in my life where somebody asked me that, and I answered yes. And I answered yes only because I wanted to make this distinction that we're talking about here clear, and to say, hey, sure, I'll call myself a patriot, but not because I love the government or I appreciate the government or even like the government, but because I appreciate this land and where my family's from, and not because I like it better than other people, or I think that the people from this land are better than others. That's what I would consider nationalism, jingoism, things of that sort. But because I do think that the land that is currently called the United States, that has been called different names by different cultures, including my ancestors since before the Europeans arrived, is a beautiful place with vast resources. And I don't mean resources in the sense of just minerals and things like that, but resources with the land itself and the animals and the diversity and the diversity of people, like all these things that I appreciate. I would say I'm a quote unquote patriot to that. But the reason, again, this question popped up is because the other day somebody commented, I thought you were a patriot, unsubbed. And this is the sort of thing that I've heard recently from the QAnon crowd, who I've noticed have really co-opted or are trying to co-opt this term, or being confused as to what this term means. And so to them, a patriot means somebody who blindly follows Donald Trump, who plays the QAnon game, who trusts the plan, and who knows that disinformation is necessary, and all these silly kind of QAnon tropes. Yes, if you haven't got it yet, QAnon is a psyop. It's a LARP. It's a lie, and you're just playing a child's game and thinking that you're being, led to the secrets and that mass arrests are coming. It's not true. And so those folks, that particular crowd, and some of them have cropped up on this channel, and everybody's welcome, but I'm just going to be real. Those folks, they think being a patriot means trusting the plan, being quiet, submitting, listening, and trusting that Donald Trump has our best interests. And if something doesn't line up and Trump does something bad, well, just trust the plan, just accept it. And if you question it, well, then you're not a patriot. Unsubbed, bye, out of here. No time for conversation. And this is a really dangerous thing. Not because, again, I'm the kind of person who uses patriot, because when I first started waking up back in 2010, 2011, 2009, when the Ron Paul movement was sort of growing after his 2008 presidential run and before his second run, the Tea Party was around at that time. And the Tea Party types were people, some of them who understood the Federal Reserve was a problem and central banks were a problem and who supported Ron Paul, and others who didn't quite get it, But a lot of that group would consider themselves patriots. And some of them I considered to be good people and they're friends, and some of them still are friends. And I could recognize, okay, they're a little more conservative, maybe right wing than I personally am, but they seem to get the picture. And there were some folks who probably used the patriotism term and were more right wing and just statists of the right wing variety and didn't really get it. But now it's even worse. And it's been so twisted that patriot means, as this definition said, supporting the war. Somebody who supports the war, they supported the war with a fierce patriotism. And so if that's your definition of patriot, then fuck no, I'm not a patriot. And again, it's not even a term I would typically use, but I do care about the country, the land of the United States. I care about Texas. I don't think it's better than other people. I don't have some sort of silly hometown pride or state pride or national pride. It's just not me. And maybe that's your gig or whatever. But I'm just saying, I do care about the values that I have grown up around and the people and the experiences I've had. I'm a quote unquote patriot to those things. So I just wanted to kind of clear that up. And then before we wrap up, and I will be posting a lot of these things in the description below, I did a little bit of research on the intersection of anarchy and patriotism. And I found this. For those who know Bad Quaker, badquaker.com, this is from Bad Quaker on Steemit, called Anarchy and Patriotism. And I think that this is a good read. It's not too long. It's got some good discussion going on afterwards. It was written in 2011, but I think it's important for people to check some of these ideas out. So I'm just going to read briefly from a couple of these essays, and some of them are very long, so I'm just going to read a couple of lines. Most people tell you that anarchy and patriotism are mutually exclusive. I would go as far to say that most anarcho-capitalists, well educated in the nuances of anarchy and libertarian theory, believe that a consistent anarchist cannot be a patriot. I would argue otherwise. I would argue that the meaning of the word patriotism has been polluted by nationalism, and as a result, the anarcho-capitalist community has unnecessarily rejected patriotism, which I will argue is not only compatible with natural law and the zero aggression principle, but will be a critical tool for liberty if we are ever to succeed in building a free world with free markets and free individuals. I do want to say I'm not an anarcho-capitalist, but I am an agorist, so I think this applies. Now we'll skip to his kind of final point. The point I'm hammering on, and hope I haven't butchered, is that even though there's no place for nationalism in a free society, because again, nationalism leads to this sort of, look, you can be free to have preferences and say, oh, I like Germany better than America or whatever, that's fine, but a lot of nationalists end up being those jingoists who want to use the state to go after other people. So I think that it's problematic, but I also think that there's some issues with the definition of nationalism too. We're not going to get into that today. But he says there's no place for nationalism in a free society. Patriotism and the warrior spirit are a natural and needed aspect of freedom. The trick is separating the two. As Paul the Apostle once said, prove all things, hold fast that which is good. At some point in time, it will become critical for the anarchists and libertarians to understand and embrace patriotism and loudly proclaim the falsity of nationalism. So that's kind of an interesting thing. I will post all these articles I'm going over in the links below. This one was written by Rob Knowles, Anarchist Notions of Nationalism and Patriotism. And again, it's kind of tied in with patriotism and nationalism are kind of tied in together, so it's an interesting read. And it discusses Russian anarchist Mikhail Bakunin, who is more of a collectivist anarchist. I wouldn't say he's my kind of anarchist per se, but again, nonetheless, there's still some interesting things to read here, and this is a little bit longer, but where's this section I was reading? Sorry, guys. Okay, right here it says, this is from Bakunin. Bakunin's understanding of nations and nationality, distinct from people's patriotism, which could be understood as affection for the fatherland, were expressed most clearly in his discussion of Slav nationalist aspirations. He asserted that, quote, nationality is not a universal human principle, but a historical local fact. Every nation, even a small one, has its own character, its own particular way of life, and manner of speaking, feeling, thinking, and behaving. These distinctive features are the essence of nationality, the product of a nation's entire history and conditions of existence. Every nation, like every individual, is of necessity what it is, and has an unquestionable right to be itself. So national rights consist precisely of this. Now, I should say that this guy's views changed over time, but he's trying to draw a distinction between what he considers legitimate nationalism and I guess what he would call patriotism, which he says is tied to sort of a love of the fatherland, and also basically separating that from from anarchism and statism. So I think that in his words, based on this guy's writing of Bakunin. It seems like Bakunin was somewhat okay with the idea of anarchists being able to support a patriotic position. We can go here as well. This is Patriotism, A Menace to Liberty from Emma Goldman, which is equally a long read, but there's some good stuff here. And we're going to just read the last paragraph because I think it sums up some of her thoughts very nicely. It says, the American working man has suffered so much at the hands of the soldier, state, and federal that he is quite justified in his disgust with and his opposition to the uniformed parasite. However, mere denunciation will not solve this great problem. What we need is a propaganda of education for the soldier, anti-patriotic literature that will enlighten him as to the real horrors of his trade, and that will awaken his consciousness to his true relation to the man whose labor he owes his very existence. It is precisely that the authorities fear most. It is already high treason for a soldier to attend a radical meeting. No doubt they will also stamp it high treason for a soldier to read a radical pamphlet. But then, has not the authority from time immemorial stamped every step of progress as treasonable? Those however, whose earnestly strive for social reconstruction can well afford to face all that, for it is probably even more important to carry the truth into the barracks than into the factory. When we have undermined the patriotic lie, we shall have cleared the path for that great structure wherein all nationalities shall be united and a universal brotherhood, a truly free society. So obviously she's taken the position that at least what is promoted as patriotism is garbage and is not actual true patriotism. And then just for another one, here's askanarchist.org. I don't know that they're an authority, but it's kind of an interesting little question and answer here. Can you be an anarchist and a patriot? Like in the sense of loving your home or country, and would you do anything for it but having the absence of government? And it says, to be an anarchist, you cannot be a patriot as you may know it. I hesitate to even call it patriotism. Your love and pride of your community, geographical area, and the extent to which you act upon that love pride should be something that you are careful with. If you consider yourself a patriot, ask yourself at least these questions. As a patriot, are you hoping to further your community's interests and goals? And if so, what are these interests and goals? Does your patriotic agenda infringe on the rights of other individuals and communities? And I think that's a very important question for those of you who identify this way to think about. Does it restrict their access to social goods or natural resources based on their association with the subject of your patriotism? Basically saying, does your patriotism deny other people's freedom and other people's right to be free from coercion, violence, force, or does it infringe upon those things? And does your patriotism align you with the state, the ruling class, or other oppressive entities which seek to maintain and benefit from the state? And in the case of the QAnon types and those type of quote-unquote patriots, yes, it aligns with the state, the ruling class, the establishment. It's actually getting you to worship their agenda and to think that by supporting the establishment, you're somehow fighting, against the deep state. So I hope that answered the question. I do believe in supporting the land that I'm from, but not because I think it's particularly, better than other people. So everybody else should be treated, horribly or something along those lines. And I definitely am not a patriot to those of you who follow QAnon and trust the plan. I'm not that kind of patriot, whatever the fuck that is. So that's it for now, guys. Just wanted to answer that. And again, you can send me questions at Derrick, Derrick, at theconsciousresistance.com or into the light at protonmail.com. Any questions? And I'll be trying to do these once every week or so. So I'm going to leave it there, guys. Until next time, remember, you are powerful, you are beautiful, and you are free. Peace.